Hello, hello. I am running a little bit late. Let me just make sure I have the chat up here. Perfect. So, if anyone does hop in, I can see you, which is wonderful. I wanted to talk today about religious trauma or religious abuse. Um, this is something that came up last night in a reading. Um, and it's something that I've lived, it's something that I've worked through, it's something that I think is not spoken about often enough. And I want to talk a little bit about what it is, how it might show up, different ways that it may affect you as an individual on a group level, and give you a tip on how to move some of that trauma out of the body because that's where trauma gets stored, in the physical body. So, the first thing I want to talk about is what is religious trauma or religious abuse. So, if you don't know about my background, I was brought up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, the difference between my story and other witnesses or ex witnesses is that my mother was never baptized. So, what does that mean? It means that she was more so on the outskirts of the religion, raising my brother and myself. So, I grew up essentially studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, but all of my beliefs were that religion. In other words, what they believe is that Armageddon is going to come, that we are very much actively living in the last days. And Armageddon was going to come, and God was going to destroy or kill any non Jehovah's Witnesses. So, as a young child, this is what I was taught, basically, the beliefs of a doomsday cult. However, my mom was not baptized. So we weren't actually, you know, in the religion. We were not preaching, knocking on doors. We were not kind of a part of their tribe, but we had all of the belief systems. So I believed that this was the truth, but I wasn't living it full time. So it had a different set of fears, and one is not worse than the other, but my fears growing up was that, Armageddon was going to come, and because my mom wasn't baptized and we weren't actively going to every single meeting or church service, I was going to probably die. That's how I grew up. So, without getting too much into my story, I just want to kind of lay the foundation that this indoctrination was fully instilled into me as a young kid. Um, I very much held two opposing kind of realities, one of which I believed, and this is one of the blessings that I had, was of my mom not being baptized because she filled me with a lot of the love of God. Um, but at the same time, the fear was there as well. So I had this beautiful, loving relationship with my creator as a very, very, very young kid. And then as I learned more about the beliefs, the fear came in, and I would kind of toggle between the two. So when I was going to meetings or when I was really active and kind of, abiding by the structure, which is at that time as a young kid, it was 3 meetings a week. So Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. And when I was doing what I deemed was the right thing, I felt good. I felt connected to God. I felt supported. And then when we would kind of fall off, or if we would celebrate a holiday one time, I would then go into the fear. But I lived my entire childhood believing that, any day God's going to, send his son back and start kind of killing everyone. And so there was tremendous fear. And so all that to say, after Armageddon, what they taught, and I don't want to make this just about Jehovah's Witnesses, because this is what I really wanted to speak on today, is that religion oftentimes gives this concept of eternity. So for Jehovah's Witnesses, after Armageddon, eternity would be living forever on a paradise earth. All of the Jehovah's Witnesses were going to live through Armageddon. They would be the only survivors of Armageddon, and they would live on earth forever. They would never die. They would never grow old. There would be no more sickness, no more suffering, no more pain. So there's this concept of forever, of eternity. And for many other denominations of Christianity and even other religions, again, this concept of eternity, living in heaven forever, right? So when you take this very abstract, inconceivable time frame that is forever, that is eternity, what is subliminally instilled underneath that is something bigger than you, something greater than you, something more than just this lifetime. It's like inconceivable to even think of eternity in our human minds. And so it kind of makes this experience a little bit less or not as important, right? Let me just do what I'm supposed to do now, because then I have all of eternity to reap the benefits. And so that's the first point that I want to make here, is this concept of eternity forever, this infinite amount of time that you have to kind of earn your keep or pay your dues now so that later on there's a payoff, right? There's this theme of sacrifice. Now, my intention is not to put any religion down. I do believe, and I had this conversation last night. I do believe that there are some, possibly churches or some organizations that I'm sure exist, that are doing things with the sincerity of their hearts. On an individual basis, I know all of my friends that I had while I was in that organization, and myself included, I was doing everything out of the sincerity of my heart. And this is just my belief, and everyone is entitled to speak their truth. So take everything with a grain of salt, as you should with anything in life. And if it resonates, take it. And if it doesn't, leave it. But I was very much doing it out of the sincerity of my heart. And as you climb the scales, as you get to, the different levels, right? Jehovah's Witnesses are just down here. Above them are the elders, and then the overseers, and then you keep climbing kind of the ranks, and there's a governing body, the channels to God. And in my opinion, when you get up to those levels, it is no longer, a lot of times, not always, nothing is ever black and white, but it's not always out of the sincerity of the heart. If you're interested in learning more about Jehovah's Witnesses, there is a book from a former governing body member called Crisis of Conscience. And I would highly recommend reading that book, because it's coming from a former top member, where, he kind of had the curtain lifted, and saw things that were not right and were not okay to him. And so he ended up leaving, and was deemed an apostate. And, as I was as well, and any, pretty much any Jehovah's Witness leaving, is deemed an apostate, to kind of protect their flock. But it's really so that you're not a threat to their people. So, what else does religious abuse look like, or religious trauma? So, again, it's like that eternity versus now. But for me, especially, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is nothing you can do as a human, no matter how much time I was putting in, effort, energy, it's never enough. It felt like it was never enough. In the beginning, it was, and I'm doing all of these things, and I'm going out in service, and I'm giving as much time as I could to their organization and praying as often as I could, reading the Bible as often as I could. But the way that mind programming works is through repetition, is through fear, is through guilt, shame. Um, and when all of those, talks that they give, from the stage, essentially they were programming. And I was programmed. And this is part of why I do the work that I do now, is because I had to first recognize that I was programmed, that I was essentially brainwashed. And I know that that might be kind of a strong term, but that's really what happened. And it's very easy as a human being who feels emotion to be brainwashed. It's a specific formula and it works. And so that's why a lot of these organizations use these tactics where you go, repetitively. And while it can be uplifting, there is also this undertone of, are you doing enough? And then guilt sinks in, and then shame sinks in, and oh, maybe, when I rested or when I just kind of wanted to decompress and like watch a movie, maybe I should have been reading the Bible, maybe I should have been doing something, maybe I should have been doing this, doing that. For me, it was, am I going out in service enough? Which was preaching, knocking on doors. It was never, it felt like enough, no matter how much I was doing. Where could I do more? And so it really instilled a lot of shame in me. And it really took a lot of my self esteem, a lot of self worth away from me. Um, because who are you comparing yourself to? And when it comes to a lot of religion, you're being compared to, someone like Jesus who was perfect. Um, how can how can you compare yourself to someone who is perfect without feeling somewhat less than, somewhat guilty, somewhat shameful? And so a lot of people walking around with religious trauma are really walking around with shame, with feelings of not being enough, not being worthy. Um, my daughter, my 13-year-old, she goes to church with her father. And while there's a lot of really beautiful things that she learns, there was also something that really, kind of had my ears perk up, which is that she's also being fed this line that she's not worthy of God, that no one is worthy of God. And so part of her journey, absolutely. And at the same time, that I want her to take the love that is in the Bible and in these groups, I also want her to tune into her own heart and her own truth and the truth that lies within her. Because Jesus said, be like the little children. And the little children are really kind of looking for just the love of God, having a loving relationship with your creator, whatever you call it, universe, God, source. Um, but we are worthy. Just for existing, we are worthy. And that is one truth that I felt and I learned on my own, and that I really want to emphasize here. Just for existing, you are worthy. You don't have to perform acts of service. You don't have to prove that. We are worthy just for existing. A lot of the programming is instilled through fear. So while religion can preach love and connection and community and wholeness and all these beautiful things, there are rules that come into play. And when fear of death and going to hell, or fear of Armageddon coming and you being destroyed, fear of, you being excommunicated from the group. When there is fear in place, and I'm sure you can think of an event that happened a few years ago where there was a lot of fear put out there through the news, through the media, through, figures that are authoritative. And in the religious world, it's, the elders, the pastors, the priests. Again, not every single one of them. I am generalizing. But when fear is put out there by an authoritative figure, your ability to use your own common sense, to tune into your own intuition, to make decisions goes offline. And you will do what you are told to do. You will eat what you are fed, so to speak. And so that conditioning, that fear, when it is programmed into you, can carry over into other areas of your life. It can carry over into relationships. And when you're dealing with the fear and the lack of self esteem and the guilt and the shame, when all of that is in your field, in your body, it can really affect who you pick as a partner, what type of friendships you have, what type of conditions you put up with in the work environment. You know, everything kind of pieces together like a puzzle. And then sometimes, it might express itself in different ways where you're going to try and gain control as much as you can in your work life because you feel out of power over here. And I'm not talking about that. But I am talking about where your self-esteem is low because you feel like you're not, accepted by the congregation perhaps, or doing the right thing for God. It is going to affect your relationships, your partnerships, maybe even your marriage, maybe your relationship with your kids. So it's really important to, number one, identify what it is that you have gone through, what it is that you're dealing with, what it is that you've experienced in life. Even if you haven't been to church in many, many years, is there anything that is alive within you that is fearful, that is programmed from the congregation or community that you were in? Is there, are you holding on to the fear of death? Are you holding on to the fear with everything that's going on in the world that, you might not survive something, or that, God is coming back, Jesus is coming back, and are you afraid of anything? The first thing I would do is identify if there is fear alive in you. And once you have the awareness of whatever it is that you are holding on to, it shines an energetic light on it so that you can process it. Processing of emotions is all it takes to kind of complete that loop. In one of the traditional philosophies, they call it a samskara. It's like a trauma loop where if it doesn't complete, that circle doesn't complete, or the loop doesn't complete, it's like an interruption. It's almost like you putting a bookmark in a trauma. And then every time you get triggered or you get scared, it's like opening up that book for you to then, finish the loop, finish the book, not to stuff it down. But the way to do that is through your awareness, through sitting with that emotion, surrendering to it. And it only takes 2 minutes. If you can allow yourself to feel the emotion, it will take 2 minutes to be processed out of you. If there's a lot of layers on it, sometimes it is really helpful to work with someone like myself, to work with any coach that is trained in somatic trauma release. But you're certainly capable of doing this on your own as well. Have the awareness, let yourself process, identify the stories that are playing on in the background of your mind, the stories that are being used to feed your identity, the way you see yourself, the way you show up in the world, what you allow in your relationships. A lot of people who have gone through religious abuse are in very toxic relationships, very emotionally abusive marriages. And there is no coincidence of those correlations with that type of upbringing, who you then choose in your adulthood. So, again, it starts with awareness, but you don't have to hold on to it. I am living proof that you don't have to hold on to it. You can deconstruct these stories, you can reprogram your mind in a positive way. And ultimately, in my opinion, spirituality is meant to free you, meant to bring you back to the heart, meant to bring you back to love, not to keep you in fear, not to limit you, not to cage you in, but to free your heart. And that's where the beauty steps in. That's where life unfolds in an empowering way, in a way that you really came here to experience. But it has to be felt from you. It has to be, you have to believe it. You have to believe it for yourself. And you have to be able to imagine it. And sometimes, if you can't do that, it's okay to have somebody else hold that dream, that image for you until you can do it yourself. So, if you've experienced religious trauma, if you're going through the deconditioning process, maybe you're clicking on this video and you're an ex Jehovah's Witness yourself, or just holding on to that fear, please reach out. You're not alone. I've had a lot of students that I've taught in the energy healing space that were raised Catholic and still holding on to a lot of fear, fear of hell, fear of, burning forever and ever. And your soul, your soul is a spirit. How can it burn? The flesh is able to burn, but your soul, I mean, and I know that people will, throw scripture. Hopefully none of those people are clicking on this video, but discover the truth for yourself. Tune into the truth of your heart, into the space of your heart, dwell within your heart, and you will know right from wrong. So reach out, email me. If you are in need of some support, I offer a free 30-minute consultation off my website, healingwithjenna.com. And feel free to leave me any questions below, anything that may have um, came up in you, anything that you want to share in the comments. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Enjoy your day wherever you are.